Good evening and welcome to the Get Football Mercato show, here every weekday to bring you the latest transfer news from across France, Germany and Italy. I am your host, Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Matthew Santangelo from Get Italian Football News, Andrew Thompson from Get German Football News, and Jeremy Smith from Get French Football News. We start this evening with a move that looks ever so likely to be going through in Italy. Has been touted nearly all summer, really, Matt, but even back before the World Cup, and that's a certain Croatian international linking up with a few more of his teammates at Inter Milan. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so it looks as though Croatia's standout defender, Sime Vrsaljko, former Sassuolo player, looks like he's coming back to Italy after all. There were plenty of teams interested in him, but it looks as though at this point that Inter are going to beat everyone to the punch. Latest out I'm hearing is an 8 million loan with an obligation to buy at 17 million, which is, in this market, is a bargain when you really consider the need for this position in the current game. We look at João Cancelo, who went to Inter last summer and they had an option for 38 million. Inter decided not to exercise that. He wound up going to Juve for something around 40. So when you can get a guy like Vrsaljko, who has obviously has international pedigree now to add to his resume, he has the experience in Serie A with Sassuolo, and now all of a sudden you're getting a guy who also has Champions League experience, and he's pretty young too. I mean, this is the slam dunk move for Inter in what has been a great summer for them overall. They've Rajan Nainggolan, Claudio Asamoah, Stefan de Vrij on a free. So, I mean, this is a slam dunk deal for Inter should they be able to pull this off. Again, there's a possibility that maybe Atletico plays a little bit more hardball because they typically don't lose in many of their transactions or their sales. Typically, they usually get max price for most of their guys. I think at this point, if you look at the price for a guy like him, it seems a little low in my opinion. I think he's probably worth a little bit more. But again, if maybe you're taking out some of the Premier League teams who would probably cough up a little bit more, you obviously can see why that him going back to Italy makes sense. And again, Inter have that Champions League to offer to players like him, and that's also very enticing. So if they're able to pull this off, again, it could be a couple days, maybe next week we'll have a little bit more of an understanding as to what the figures are, possibly a medical and possibly a confirmation of the player. But yeah, if they can pull this off, this would be a great move for Inter and something that would help them quite a bit in not only Serie A but in the Champions League.
Yeah, because it was really getting that Champions League football that has sealed a lot of these deals. And ironically, it was Stefan de Vrij that might have been the man really that handed them to him with his old team at expense. But focusing on the Croatian, obviously he's been in Italy before. He's had a successful few years at Atletico Madrid. Obviously, they're maybe looking at getting a replacement in. But like you say, Matt, it seems like a bargain and a player that would fit straight into Luciano Spalletti's side.
Yeah, I mean, 25 million. That's, I mean, if you're really looking at, what Inter have been able to get 25 million, assuming with the figures hold up, the 8 million option, 8 million loan and 17 million option. If you look at what they've been able to accomplish the past 2 summers with that defense, they got Milan Skriniar for pretty 22, 23 million from Samp. He's obviously a hot product and someone who's been getting Premier League interest throughout the entire season. De Vrij was obviously getting Premier League interest as well from Chelsea and several others. Now you add Claudio Asamoah and Vrsaljko. I mean, that's a revamped defensive back line, and that's something that is definitely going to be difficult to break down domestically for sure, but also in the Champions League. The Inter they're building quite a team to compete. And again, you add Nainggolan into the mix. They're possibly even looking to get Arturo Vidal, which would be sensational if they can do that. That'd be pretty much the cherry on the top for them. They got Lautaro Martinez, who is a coveted striker. So it's just kind of been a great summer for Inter overall. If you're an Inter fan, you got to be quite pleased with the activity that Piero Ausilio has been able to muster up, because this team looks ready to go. They look like they're here to stay, and they're here to be a contender in the Champions League.
And you had the experience in goal behind that defence in Sami Handanovic. You had the goals of Mauro Icardi looking like he's staying and maybe signing a new contract. They might be a danger even to Juventus, but we'll wait and see. On to things in Ligue 1, Jez, and this 2 clubs really that are grounding to a halt in this transfer window, mainly due to the demands of one mega agent. It's unsurprisingly, Mino Raiola maybe holding things up a little bit, keeping Marseille and Nice at ransom at the moment. It seems like it's all to do with one big Italian forward that seems to never get any headlines at all, really. But a strange one that it seems to be his movie is essentially stalling both their summers.
They're probably the two of the clubs who've had certainly Nice with the, he's obviously like a big draw, and Nice, a little bit like a kind of mini Monaco, have been more or less revamping their squad every summer for the last 3 or 4 years now. The problem is that a few players have gone out, but so far not many have come in. And it does seem that the Balotelli deal is kind of holding things up for both clubs, because Nice really could do with the money. Marseille could really do with the striker, and I'm not sure that either of them know what else to do sort of around the transfer market until that deal's done.
It is an interesting one, isn't it? Because we've just posted a thread on our Twitter feed if you do want to check it out. But the basics of it is Mario Balotelli wants to leave Nice. He's Marseille's top priority, but they've not made a move because Mino Raiola wants his payday, which is unsurprising. It's never like he's ever wanted any money from any club ever in existence. But Nice have a big transfer kitty. They can't decide whether if Mario Balotelli stays, they buy a young forward. If he goes, they make a bit of a splash. Then same for Marseille. They don't really want to stick on Balotelli or something and then end up not getting him at all. So they demanded a new striker from sort of their fan base. They need someone to add to that X factor, and they obviously still need to comply with financial fair play. So at the moment, everything is sort of held up. It's a good job that their summer isn't shutting in a couple of weeks' time like it is in England, just because both these clubs need to do something, especially Marseille, who they need to get someone in to really push for those Champions League places that they really, really need to be aiming for this season.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Marseille, obviously, with the squad they had last year, they did, they had a really good season. In Garcia, they've got an excellent manager who's going to do a good job with whatever he's got. But you did feel that the one thing holding them back last year was the lack of a really top striker. So I think Balotelli is very important to them. A deal with for Remy Cabella to go the other way as some kind of make weight, which I think would work really well. I mean, he obviously just hasn't fitted in at Marseille. I think he and Saint-Etienne, where he was on loan last year, had their hearts set on each other, but for whatever reason, that's not going to happen. So I think possibly a move for him to Nice could work well for all parties if that enables the Balotelli bit to take place. But at the moment it does feel like it's Raiola's sort of city games and ego trips, amazingly, like having a huge effect on two of France's biggest clubs not being able to do anything yet at the moment.
He does like his money, doesn't he, Mino Raiola? And he will wait to get paid as long as it will take, at least anyway. But we wait for that to continue on. And into the Bundesliga, where a move pretty much seems done and dusted, as much as you can really have it done and dusted, really, Andrew, because Davy Klaassen has arrived in Bremen and has had his medical today. He's pretty close to being assured. Is he the right player for Bremen to start moving forwards again and looking towards Europe?
I think it'll certainly help. You have to look at it in a positive light and what he can bring to the table. Anyone who knows anything about the player, he came through at Ajax since age 11, predominantly an attacking midfield player. Obviously, he has goals in him. He's creative, and goals and creativity are both things that Werder Bremen do struggle with, especially over the past couple of years. But I think people need to look at this deal and understand that it's not. He wouldn't be coming in and replacing Thomas Delaney more than he would be replacing Zlatko Junuzovic, who's also left. He went over to Red Bull Salzburg. And I think that's how people have to view this. If you look at the squad currently, they already have deeper midfielders, with the likes of Philip Bargfrede, Thanos Petsos, Maximilian Eggestein, players like in that mold, but they're really lacking a central player who can can create from deep, can get forward into the final third, really provide a secondary or third source of goals past the strikers as a wide player. So in terms of what Bremen could do in the goal scoring charts, hopefully moving forward, starting with next season under Florian Kohfeldt, that's going to be what they're looking to target, and that's something that they've definitely struggled with, and that's going to have to be a way for me. I think it's the main reason why they're struggling with relegation dogfights the last couple of years. If they can just get more consistent goal scoring, someone who can really pull the strings, it'll help them in a really big way.
And that's what they hope to get from Klaassen, who did have a pretty dire season, really. Part of it's not essentially his fault because he barely played, really. Both managers didn't really seem that favourable on him, but he was great at Ajax. He stayed there for a long while, but longer than a lot of the other prospects down in Amsterdam recently. But going on to sort of what he can do, at least anyway, do you feel like this could be the right kind of club for him as well to resurrect his stalling career, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think Everton was necessarily the wrong club in terms of stature of the club. I just think he shouldn't have gone to Everton considering they had an overloaded midfield in terms of options. He was already competing with, Gylfi Sigurdsson, Ross Barkley when he was still there before he moved to Chelsea. So for me, when you just look at in terms of opportunities, you had to question it. Obviously the allure of the Premier League pulls a lot of players in that direction, but sometimes, common sense kind of eludes you in a way. But I do think that, a lot of players can come from the Eredivisie and actually build quite solid careers for themselves in the Bundesliga. And I think this is a good way to bounce back. He's just now approaching rather his primary playing years of his career. He's not even 27 yet, so he still has plenty to give, and I do think that Kohfeldt's the kind of manager that can get the best out of him. And I do think, again, like I said before, he brings a lot to the table that they have been lacking, both in midfield and in goal terms. So I think it'll work out for sure.
Yeah, and Bremen know their attacking midfielders with fair hair that maybe a little bit underrated and creative, having Kevin De Bruyne there for a season a few years ago in the loan market. On to our focuses now and back into Serie A with you, Matt. And there's a couple of moves for Lazio today. There's a couple of moves, at least in pretty much the deals are done, but they've not been confirmed yet from different outlets. And that's for Joaquin Correa, originally of Sevilla, who obviously had a fantastic season, and also Milan Badel heading that way on potentially a free transfer as well. What do you think to those two potential deals?
Well, Correa was he was a player that came from Sampdoria a couple years ago. Sampdoria, again, they've been one of the teams that I myself have been focused on for quite some time now. Of course, Lucas Torreira, Skriniar, Dennis Praet, who's still there, but is also being, looked at quite closely. They have guys, Patrick Schick is another one. So there's always players at Samp. They do a great job of finding talent, spanning outside Italy and around Europe. And then this is one of those cases where they had a guy like him a couple years ago, sold him to Sevilla. But now it looks like that he's going to be coming back to Italy with Lazio interested. 16 million euros plus 3 million bonuses, which would be a pretty good deal for Lazio. Igletare, their sporting director, has done a great job. He's one of the best, in my opinion, in Italy, and I think he's starting to get the praise he deserves around Europe. This would be a move that I think it's a little bit mixed. If you ask people that have followed La Liga the past couple of years, that he's a guy that's obviously talented, but similar in case with like Felipe Anderson, who went to West Ham and who was at Lazio, so talented, has the flashes, the brilliance that you see, in certain spurts, but sometimes he struggles with consistency. And I think that's maybe where Lazio see the value here, in that if they can get a guy for 16 to 17 million euro, maybe Inzaghi can have that same type of effect on him like he had with Luis Alberto, the former Liverpool player. For those who are unfamiliar, Luis Alberto was one of a few people in Serie A last year who had double-digit goals and assists. He was spectacular, and in my opinion, was just as important to Lazio nearly qualifying for Champions League as Ciro Immobile was. So it just speaks volumes as to what type of coach Inzaghi is in developing talent, but also getting the best out of some of his stars. So for a guy like Correa, this would be a pretty good coup, in my opinion. Again, they still have to make this thing final, but it looks as though he's going to be coming back to Italy, and it's a big step for him. Again, he doesn't have Champions League football to play in, but he's definitely going to have the Europa League. He's going to get the opportunity to shine, and he's still very young to the point where you can't give up on players like this, because if you get the right manager, the right system, and especially in Italy, it's a challenging league for sure. He has some experience, but there's a lot of players that come to Italy, they find their footing, and then they wind up moving abroad. And I think that's possibly the case here with Correa, whereas if he gets, the minutes, the proper time and space, in attacking positions to really shine, I think he can have a big impact on Lazio next season in what they want to accomplish, which is obviously to compete for top four.
Yeah, and on to the other man in this, in Lazio's thoughts at the moment, Milan Badel, obviously potentially a free transfer as well. Not just obviously what he brings, he was great at Fiorentina, had a couple of minutes in the World Cup as well for Croatia, a decent player, but as well as him being a good addition to Lazio, and it's a bit of a sneaky one, this one, Matt, does this potentially, for those other excited parties that are looking at a certain Milinkovic-Savic, thinking that maybe there might be an opening for Lazio saying he's maybe a replacement for him?
Well, I think with Badel, he's been linked to Milan quite closely the past week and a half, and really since he became a free agent after his contract expires with Fiorentina. Great, one of the last few, I guess, traditional regista around, in the sense that he plays that role quite smoothly with efficiency and effectiveness, and he's a guy that really can man and control a midfield. This would be a great move for Lazio for sure, although Lucas Leiva had a great year last year, or under the radar year last year, when he moved from Liverpool to Lazio. Again, it's that same type of system where there's players that Simone Inzaghi observes and he feels that they can fit. A guy like Badaj on a free transfer is really a no-brainer. He had interest from Milan, he had interest from Zenit St. Petersburg, but if he's able to stay in Italy, I think it bodes well for him. As for Milinkovic-Savic, it's weird because it seems as though that all these teams that are possibly interested in him, they don't want to. They're not paying 130, 140 like Lotito wants, and I understand why the asking price is what it is. But at the same time, it's these teams are saying we're not going to go and break the bank for a guy who had really essentially one and a half good years in Italy. 130, 140 million for me is a little bit steep, and I wouldn't be surprised if a team like Real Madrid, if they get desperate towards the end, do decide to splash. But if we're going by if Badaj is a free agent, if he's the replacement option for a possible Milinkovic-Savic, I don't think so, because I think they play two different roles. In that Milinkovic-Savic is a guy that usually charges forward. He's that physical presence in the air, and really a guy that just couldn't. He's kind of that Serbian Paul Pogba. We've heard that so many times. I'm not going to say they're a direct comparison, because Pogba, a World Cup winner, playing for Juve, obviously at Manchester United now, but at the same time, I think Badaj is a guy that's going to be more anchoring that midfield, and he's going to allow guys like Milinkovic-Savic to push forward and be more of an influence in the attacking third. Again, should he stay? So it's going to be interesting. There's obviously, we're not done hearing from Milinkovic-Savic on a possible transfer, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive, in that if he does come in on a free transfer by Badaj, it's going to free up them to say, hey, maybe we could sell this player, because I think it's quite clear that Lazio really know what type of talent they have in Milinkovic-Savic, and if they do manage to keep him for another year, his value can only skyrocket with teams' needs for creative, influencing players like him.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just more, some people might start doing the FIFA maths of saying he's a centre midfielder, done deal. On to some other news around Italy, one involving a Premier League club looking at a player, and that's they're looking into Rugani potentially joining them. They're supposedly putting in a big offer for him. Soon enough, Maurizio Sarri's obviously seen enough of him in Italy. What can you tell us, Matt, about Rugani and how he may fit in at Stamford Bridge if he was to go?
Well, Rugani, this is an interesting one, because he's been a touted player for a while at Juve. Of course, he's been there for several years, really playing more of a super sub role, in that he play against some of these provincial sides, maybe get occasional spell in the Champions League for Juve. But overall, it's been throughout this, his last 3 years at the club, give or take, it's been really just been BBC and Benatia involved in getting all the minutes. Now that's what's kind of freeing up the possibility that maybe he will decide to go to and experience life in England. Again, the link, Maurizio Sarri is at Chelsea now, who also coached him at Empoli, and really one of his best years as a footballer. And that's speaking volumes, because he is so young, but at age, I think 20 or 21, the guy didn't he didn't have a single yellow card to his name, and he was really one of the best players in the league at an Empoli side that was starting to get the praise and stuff, because obviously Sarri was attached to them. I think for Rugani, if you're looking at from a Chelsea's perspective, this is a good move for them, and I think something that's you look at the connection between Sarri and Rugani, and you could say, you know what, maybe it's a little steep, but this is a guy who's 23, 24, who's not even close to hit in his prime years. If Sarri manages to be able to, to convince the Chelsea board to bring this guy in, again, the fee will be steep. But what fee isn't steep for a good, good central defender these days, right? I mean, looking at the prices, it's constantly going up. Virgil van Dijk, you're looking at, Laporte, you're looking at Stones. The price is always going up. So if you're Sarri and you can get to say this guy's a slam dunk addition for us long term, I think there's definitely a move they want to make. Again, 55 million euros is the reported fee. However, Juve are playing a little hardball. They don't want to get rid of these guys because they do realize they do have quite a bit of value. Same thing with Mattia Caldara, who Milan are after. So it's going to be interesting. I think this is a story to continue to watch because we know that Juve still want to make some additions elsewhere, specifically in the midfield. And you assume that, they would possibly part ways with one of Rugani or Caldara. But again, if Bonucci comes to Juve, what does that say about their trust in Rugani? So again, it's really interesting. It's kind of, again, there's always these moving parts. One domino has to fall for maybe Rugani to go to Chelsea. Maybe they get Bonucci back and they say, you know what? Bonucci's in the fold. We're going to try to go for Champions League. We don't have time to wait for a guy like Rugani. Let's cash in now and let's move forward. So it's going to be interesting. But I think, again, Chelsea would be getting a really good young player and someone Maurizio Sarri quite likes because of their past experience.
And yeah, Juve maybe want to be careful about selling too many young defenders, given that Chiellini and Barzagli aren't getting any younger, at least. Anyway, final bit on Serie A, and it's involving a Juve player again, in Marco Piaccia, who is interesting. A number of English clubs, Leicester, Everton, have all been linked with him today. He's a player looking to get a move, really, Matt, because he's ready for that first team football, having been on loan last season at Schalke as well. Do you think that sounds like a goer there for him to head to England?
I absolutely do. I think the more you look at this Juve roster, the more you realize that really just isn't minutes for him to play. I mean, when he first arrived, he if you guys recall, he was linked with Milan and Juve. Juve he wound up choosing because obviously the opportunity, Milan were obviously in a difficult situation, and even though he was coming off the bench mostly, then he was a young player. You want to be able to grow into a winning environment. And I think that's what Juve offered him. But as we started to see, the players come in like Douglas Costa, Bernardeschi, even Juan Cuadrado still playing a key role, paired with the fact that Piazza couldn't stay injury-free, now you're starting to see I think Juve selling to Leicester City is more not indicative of what they believe in his talent, because I think they do know he's very, very, very gifted, but I think it's more that they don't really have they don't have the flexibility to offer him the minutes to see how gifted he really is, because again, we all know what Juve's ambitions are. When you add a guy like Ronaldo, you want to bring back Bonucci, it's Champions League, it's treble. That's what they're going for. So you really look at Piazza and you think he's just surplus to requirements. For Leicester, I think it's a great move. If they can get him on a pretty good price, he's a guy who's still very young, obviously very, very gifted, very talented. He has the experience for Croatia as well. So if Leicester can pull this off, I think it's a good piece of business for them. And it's something that can then maybe fetch him a profit down the line, again, should the price not be too steep and he does perform for him.
Got big shoes to fill if he does head there, with Riyad Mahrez being the potential Maniesta off seat, at least, who's headed to Manchester City. But on to league matters now, and unfortunately, Jez, it's a lot of moves out of the league, really, more than anything, but some very talented players at least. And one starting off with is Yusuf Sabali, who looks like he's off to Italy, ironically, and to Napoli, possibly to play sort of a role that Gulam would have played if he wasn't injured towards the end of last season. Maybe he would have helped there. But a good player for Bordeaux last season, and they'll be sad to see him go.
Yeah, I think they will do. One of the more consistent Bordeaux players. They kind of had a very up and down season, and he was one of the few who sort of turned up sort of week in, week out throughout the whole campaign. Yeah, I like Sabri. I think he's a really good professional. You could argue he hasn't had the easiest career so far. He's been on PSG's books for the longest time, but has never actually played for them. Sort of kept being shipped out on loan. He went to Evian, then to Nantes, and then Bordeaux. And wherever he's been, he's turned up. He's done a really good professional job. He's been able to play either fullback position, both of them well. Last couple of years, I think he's added a lot more to his game in terms of sort of supporting the attack and coming up with quite a few assists. I think even in terms of sort of international football, he's sort of taken knocks and come back from them. I mean, he was part of the France under-20 team that won the World Cup in 2013. Half that team, maybe not half, but 3 or 4 of that team have just won the full-blown World Cup. He obviously, because of what's been happening in his club career, hasn't come close to the full France squad, but has opted to play for Senegal, and has played well enough that he's played his way into the squad, and so he's still got his sort of World Cup appearances. Came up with an assist against Japan as well. So it's a talented fullback and just a really good professional as well.
And I think Bodo will be relatively pleased, at least anyway. A figure believed about 20 million euros is a nice fee for a right back, really, especially when he's only really been on the books for a year or so. Obviously, he was on loan previously to that, but I think they'll be at least happy with the fee. Another fullback on the way, and we kind of expected him to eventually go somewhere, and it looks like Jerome Roussillon will be heading to Wolfsburg. They seem pretty happy that a deal may be done, and the Montpellier man this season, Jez, has been pretty terrific, really. And the defensive side, it really seems like their only creative force, really. But at the same time, maybe it seems like the right time for him to make a bigger move.
Yeah, you said that it's all moves out of France at the moment, and unfortunately, that often seems to be the case. I mean, on the upside, that's why I think France produce so many good young players, because they get more chances than they would elsewhere. But a lot of the clubs seem to also have this. In France, they call it bon de sortie, which is I was going to say get out of jail free card. That makes it sound a bit worse than it is. But it seems that a lot of sort of long-serving players will come to deals with everyone in the background, saying, have one more good season for us and we'll let you go next year. Next summer we won't cause any fuss. And I think Roussillon's one of them that's had that this year. And for whatever reason, it seems to have always been German clubs connected with him more than any other. But yeah, for a while now he's been a really good player. But I think this season was probably his best yet. And you have a look at his sort of, not his heat map, but his kind of starting position, and it's basically everywhere all along the left wing. He's essentially a left back, but again, such a good attacking player that I think it's probably him more than anything else that made Montpellier change to a back five, with 3 strong centre backs, but with him given the freedom to really sort of rampage up the left. And he's been a key part of their team, both in terms of, I think they're possibly were the second best defence in Liga, and as you said, they're not necessarily the most attacking force, but a lot of it did come from him. And as well as helping the defence, he also came up with, I think, 3 goals, 3 assists, something like that. So really exciting, quick player. Again, just very enthusiastic and always getting stuck in, and the kind of player who definitely, I think, become a fan favourite.
Yeah, rightfully so, because he was excellent at Montpellier last season, and they may start to worry with him and Nordi Mukiele off the books. They might not be as strong next season, at least defensively, at least. But another exit again of finishing off tonight, really. Hopefully one that might not come off, otherwise Paul Rich Allen might have a heart attack, really, because Benjamin Mauricio has been linked with Borussia Dortmund for a good play. He had a terrific season, to be fair, really under the radar one at Rennes last season, coming from Lens. And although Dortmund have a lot of midfielders, he had a lot to offer at the same time, wouldn't he?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you said, poor Rich, Rennes lost Nyagnon yesterday, and immediately there's rumours of Bouchard going. He served his time at Lens, did very well there, starting quite young, kind of went up and down divisions with them. But has always been one of their standout players. And then last year was kind of the test for him, sort of going up to Ligue 1, going up a level. Could he handle it? And I don't think it's even an argument that he was one, if not the best Rennes player last season. Again, he can play pretty much anywhere in the forward half. Nominally a sort of attacking central midfielder, but can play on the wings, can play even further up as well. He's he's their main set piece taker. He can score from free kicks. He's got a great long shot. He's good in the air. He can really do a bit of everything, and I'm again not surprised that he's become a sort of hero amongst Rennes fans. And I think Rennes have said that they're not even going to consider any offers under 25 million euros. But to be honest, even that would be cheap for him, unless there's sort of lots of add-ons and sell-on clauses, because he really is an excellent player who I think, there's obviously a hell of a lot of competition in the France squads, but if he carries on his upward curve, I really think that he could push his way to the fringes of the France team.
I mean, it'd be a genuine shame for us to finally see him have a good season in France in the top division and head straight out again. But we've given you a chance to stew on those two, Andrew, really, because obviously we wanted to get the French perspective on it first, but onto the sort of German perspective for both of those moves. Wolfsburg had a pretty dreadful season by most standards last season, but have always got the clout to sort of bounce themselves back up again. They need more attacking players. They need more defensive players. And Roussillon sort of ticks both those boxes. And a left back since Ricardo Rodriguez headed to AC Milan, it has been a little bit of a weakness, and potentially now bringing him might improve that.
Well, I mean, it might, but I don't. I mean, I guess for me, I don't know. I just don't see it. It's hard for me to, I guess, to get at the moment. But at left back right now, there's Yannick Gerhardt and Gianluca Ito already at the club. So bringing in a third left back, it's either they feel that Roussillon's going to come in and compete with Gerhardt while Ito is either going to go out on loan or still develop it, maybe in under-19s, or they feel like neither of them is going to be potentially good enough. Again, there's nothing wrong with obviously having depth, and obviously Ito's only 19 years old, so there's no sense in necessarily rushing him. And if he's going to be second choice behind Gerhardt, he's not going to get enough time to really truly get that next level of development. Obviously, once you're 19 or 20, you need to be playing minutes, don't you? So if they're planning on loaning him out and then just having Roussillon and Gerhardt compete for a left back spot, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But then you also have to question the long-term options. Gerhardt himself is only 24 years old. So if there comes through, whether if it's his loan or for the development in the 19s, then you're going to have three left backs at the club. But then what's your next step when it comes to that? You don't want an overload in one position in your first team. Then that's going to cause maybe some selection problems. The other thing that you could say, however, is that maybe one of those options is going to be shifted to the right-hand side. Sebastian Jung and Paul Verhaeghe are both injured. So they only have one right back currently in William. So perhaps if I don't know if Roussillon can play on the right, or maybe they'll shift it to Gerhardt. Maybe they're potentially, if that's the case, then that would make complete sense. But it is good to see that they're at least trying to address issues. Wolfsburg is one of those clubs that have such potential, but they never really realized that potential except for that one season where Kevin De Bruyne was absolutely brilliant for them. So it'll be interesting to see how they move forward in that position and how that'll affect potentially other parts of the park.
Yeah, I'm always surprised by, even though Wolfsburg struggled incredibly last season, how they can still attract so many good players. And also onto the other deal, really, and we've talked about Bourigeaud. He's a bit more of either a centre midfielder or a right midfielder. It doesn't feel like he quite fits into that Dortmund squad with them playing more advanced wingers. He doesn't really quite work in that role. Maybe he might play as an attacking midfielder, but does he fit straight in? They've just bought Delaney as well. What do you think to this move? It would be another expensive one for Dortmund. Is it an expense maybe a little bit too far?
Well, I don't know if it's an expense too far. Obviously, there's the speculation about where Julian Weigl is going to end up. Obviously there seems to be growing credibility and the possibility of him going to PSG with Thomas Tuchel. So, and a lot of the fans are done with Nuri Sahin, and if they're looking to move him on as well, then they're actually potentially lacking in true central midfield options. Zenit Bernic came back from a Stuttgart loan, but there's no telling if he's going to actually fit into Lucien Favre's first team plans. Obviously, they brought in Thomas Delaney and Mahmoud Dahoud's still there, and Sebastian Rode is still there, but that would still leave them maybe a bit short, especially if they're shifting players out. So in those terms, I think it would make sense. But when you look at that team, obviously that would be probably the only place he could fit into it, because they're not lacking in attacking options either as central attacking midfielders or left or right side attacking players. So if that move does go through, for me personally, I think it means that one of Weigl or Sahin are leaving the club, or potentially both of them. So it'll be interesting to monitor that and see if that's maybe the signal for one of those moves to happen.
Yeah, and on to other things in the Bundesliga. It has been a little bit more quiet today. Surprisingly, maybe they got through a lot of it yesterday with Schürrle heading for the loan deal and such. And Muto's deal obviously has been confirmed, so we'll sort of skip that one this evening. So on to one we briefly mentioned last night, at least, Andrew, and that was Leon Bailey. We're talking about him potentially. Roma was interested in him. There was things from the sporting directors at the club saying Bayer Leverkusen were categorically not going to sell him. But at the same time, today the Jamaican has maybe hinted that he does want to leave.
I think it depends on if you want to listen to the source. I've not personally seen anything coming out of Germany at the moment that commented on that, but it's come from the Daily Mail saying that he would like to leave this summer. I mean, that was always a possibility. Obviously, Leverkusen are going to want to keep him for this season or as long as possible. But he is of that talent level that he's going to attract bigger clubs, and he already has done. You know, there was a lot of interest, and he was heavily scouted at certain points last year. So it wouldn't surprise me if potentially he's looked at the field that are looking at him and maybe said, you know, this is now my chance to actually move on. There are other good young attacking players in Europe, especially currently. So if he doesn't maybe take his chance now, moving on to a club with a bigger profile, those clubs will move elsewhere. So it really just comes down to the player. I don't know if Leverkusen will hold out for maybe more money. You know, currently, the last I checked, its value is roughly between 40 and 45 million euros. So obviously, they want maybe a little bit more than that. But I don't know if they'll necessarily reinvest it if he was to move. When you look at the squad right now, you know, like I mentioned yesterday, you know, Kai Havertz is still there, Julian Brandt is still there, and he did sign a contract extension. But they also this summer brought in Paulinho from Vasco da Gama, Karim Bellarabi is still there, Kevin Volland can slot in on the right or left side attacking role, and then there's Sam Schreck, who's come through at the under-19s, who's just come into the first team as well. So they're not short on players who can play in wider areas or, you know, behind a center forward. So they are equipped to deal with replacing him in-house, not necessarily with reinvestment, and that's something that Leverkusen traditionally struggle with. You know, they're not really known for shelling out a ton of money, and much to their fans' chagrin. But it's also worth noting that this summer they also brought in Mitchell Weiser from Hertha Berlin, and you know, obviously he played right back at Hertha, but he came through at Bayern Munich as a right-sided attacking player. And you can say something about Benjamin Hendricks as well. He came through at Leverkusen's youth system as a right-sided attacking player. And Bailey predominantly plays on the right side. Julian Brandt usually slots in on the left. So there are plenty of options there if he does move on. It wouldn't surprise me if maybe something did materialize if those links to him wanting to leave the summer are credible, but it also wouldn't shock me if he stayed one more season and then left next summer. So.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to follow because he's certainly going to be a name in the news for the next 2 weeks at least while the British window stays open. Final bit of news tonight, and that's a club and a player that have been linked plenty of times recently, and that's Borussia Mönchengladbach and Reece Oxford of West Ham United. Obviously went on loan there last season, came back, went back again. It was a bit of a strange one, really, but now it looks like Gladbach are looking to tie down a permanent deal. We've heard of Max Erbel's sort of appreciation of the young generation of English footballers, and he wants to make true on that by purchasing his first one.
Well, I think this will be a move that would probably suit him. And I think it would be targeted by the fact that Yannick Vestergaard has left the club. He went over to Southampton, obviously. So right now, currently, if you look at the squad, there's a place for him in the first team. They really only have 2, maybe 3 center backs that are truly first team ready at the moment. You know, you have the German national Matthias Ginter, and then you have Nico Helvetti. Apart from that, you know, Louis Bayer and Florian Meyer, they're both 20 and 18 respectively, and Mamadou Dekor is actually injured, and he's also still quite young. You know, he's only 20 years old. So Oxford is young himself, but he would have maybe settled a little bit better at the club. You know, he'll understand what's expected of him. Gladbach do have a history of bringing through young players and trusting those young players if they feel they're good enough. You can think of Michael Cuisance as a prime example. You know, the French youth international. He's done absolutely brilliantly for them last season, and he's been given some serious minutes despite being young. Dennis Zakaria is another example in midfield. I know Oxford can play midfield, but it's the fact that Zakaria and Christoph Kramer and Tobias Strobel and Kisans do get a fair amount of minutes for the team that you'd have to think that this would be them targeting another option to fill the void that Vestergaard would have left. And obviously the price point is relatively attractive for a young player who does have some high-level potential. 16 million really isn't that steep of a amount of money to pay for it, so I think it'd be good business if it does go through.
But at the same time, 16 million is a statement of intent to say that Oxford is a player they want for the future, and let's hope that that comes to the case at least, because might not get the minutes at West Ham, which is a little bit worrying from an English perspective at least. But that's all we have for this evening. My thanks to Matthew, Andrew and Jez for their company this evening, and all of you at home, of course, as well. Please do join us again tomorrow for more from the crazy world of the transfer window.